a panel on experimental analysis of human behavior. A little bit about our series. Today we're going to, I'm going to share just a little bit about our series, as I mentioned. We may do the pre-test. We were having a little bit of technical difficulties with that a minute ago, but if not, we can always circle back to that later. I'll have a very brief introduction of the panelists and then have them introduce themselves. At the end, we will leave about 10 to 15 minutes or so, depending upon how much we get through of time for the audience. If you guys have any specific questions that we didn't address already, and then concurrently while we're doing that, we'll have you guys do the post-test, and then we'll do the graduate application raffle, which is something that we set up for students. If you guys are interested in, whoever's interested in going to graduate school, we encourage you guys to enter that raffle, and then we'll just draw one person at the very end. Okay, so the purpose of our series. So we were fortunate to receive funding from the Society for Experimental Analysis of Behavior. And so they have provided us some funding to put on this series, in which we are trying to broaden the reach of applied behavior analysis outside of just working with individuals with autism spectrum disorders. So we are doing a variety of panels on a variety of different topics to try to highlight other areas and other possible places that people could get interested in, specifically students. But of course, if there's practitioners or other professionals in the audience, we're definitely happy to have you guys share your experiences or just talk with us about any questions you guys have if you're interested in various topics. But really just trying to disseminate our science beyond just working with individuals with disabilities. So we do have, like I said, the pre-test I think right now is a little bit on hold, but if you guys could just quickly scan in. If you don't have capabilities to scan in, let us know and we can put the link for that in the chat. But if you guys could just do a very brief demographic survey, we are interested in just seeing if there's differences between the people that are interested in various topics, and just using those data just to kind of have as a way to kind of see if there's any interesting information related to that. Natalie, who is my co-host, will be putting that information in the chat if you guys didn't have a chance to scan in yet. If you are a student, and this could be an undergraduate or a graduate student, and are interested in possibly going to graduate school, here is the QR code for the raffle. So we encourage, again, like I said, anyone that's interested to go ahead and enter, and then at the end we will just randomly pull someone, and then you will be eligible for a waiver for one graduate school application. And again, if you need this code after I move forward, just let us know. We can put the link in the chat. Oops. All right, so today we are fortunate to have 4 great panelists who will be speaking to you about their experiences and some of their backgrounds in the experimental analysis of behavior. So I'll let them introduce themselves, but just as a very brief introduction, we have Dr. Tim Hackenberg, Dr. Camilo Hurtado-Parrado, Dr. Anna Pétursdóttir, hopefully I'm saying everyone's name correctly, and Dr. Catalina Rey. So thank you all for your willingness to come and participate with us in our panel discussion today. I do want to just mention also that we will actually, I just realized we did not yet record this, so give me 1 second. That's also something we need to do. Oh, Natalie is doing it, great, thank you. And we will be posting this panel. We've been posting all of our series on our YouTube channel, because we do have people that are interested in the specific topics that may not be available at this time. So if anyone has any concerns or questions about that, let us know. But otherwise, you can access the panel after today on our YouTube channel, which I'll share that reference at the very end. All right, so we're going to go ahead and turn it over to the panelists. So the first question, as I mentioned, we're going to get to know a little bit more about our panelists today. So share a little bit about yourself, some of your background, if you're doing research in this area, if you're teaching, or just whatever your experiences that you're willing to share with us. We'd definitely be interested in hearing about it. So why don't we start with Dr. Rey, if that's okay.
Hi, I'm Catalina, and guess my background is a little bit windy road, but I got introduced to behavior analysis as an undergraduate at Florida State University, and did my master's degree in OBM, which is where I started working with, funny enough, like more clinical populations. And then I did do some clinical work after my master's degree and getting certified as a board certified behavior analyst, and eventually went back to do my PhD at Florida Institute of Technology. And that's where I started doing more of the basic research with human populations. And then I went on to do a postdoc at Kennedy Krieger, and then where I did mostly very severe, intensive, challenging behavior work. And then I did a second postdoc at University of Vermont, in which I worked with, worked on a clinical trial looking to decrease unintended pregnancies among women with opioid use disorder. And I also did some basic, I did that with Dr. Sarah Heil, and then I did also some basic research with rats with Mark Boughton and Eric Threadkill. And now I'm an assistant professor at the University of Nebraska Medical Center at Monroe Meyer Institute in the Integrated Center for Autism Spectrum Disorders. And where I continue doing various different kinds of research, but some of the research that I'm doing is considered would be like human operant and looking at relapse and DRO schedules. So that's a little bit or a lot about me.
Awesome, thank you. Dr. Pétursdóttir, would you like to go next? And am I saying your last name right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
Great.
sure. I will be happy to go next. So yeah, I was born and raised in Iceland, and I did my undergraduate degree there at the University of Iceland. And I became interested in behavior analysis for several reasons. Probably one of the biggest contributor, though, was my early experience working in ABA and in a home program for a child with autism diagnosis. And so basically working as what we now call a behavior tech. And I was definitely a member of the very first cohort of behavior techs in Iceland back in the day. I then went to Western Michigan University. I was originally planning only to get my master's degree, and then I wanted to go back home to Iceland and practice. But basically, as soon as I became involved in research, I changed my mind and I decided to stay for my PhD and did my research. Most of my research at the time was in the area of verbal behavior. And I am now, and basically, yeah, most of the time since I graduated, I have been at Texas Christian University, where I'm now associate professor of psychology, and continue to do research on verbal behavior, stimulus control, derived stimulus relations, and so on and so forth.
Awesome, thank you. Sorry, just real quick to answer. It looks like the pretest is now working. So for those of you in the audience, if you could please go to the chat and click on the link that Dr. Williams Awodeha shared. You guys can start working on that while we're still doing introductions. We would appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Hurtado-Parrado, would you like to go next?
Hey, thank you. Can you hear me all right? Okay, so yeah, I was born and raised in Colombia, South America, and that's where I got my bachelor's and my master's degrees, both in psychology, but with an emphasis in experimental analysis of behavior. My family, my mother, my brothers, and some of my relatives migrated to Canada several decades ago. I was the last to join them. So I did that, and I did my PhD over there in Winnipeg, Manitoba, the University of Manitoba, and under Dr. Joe Baires' supervision. I did mostly experimental analysis of behavior with him and some research on behavioral teaching methods. He personalized system of instruction and stuff like that. And then I moved back to Colombia in a private university, small, and I did research, and I was an assistant and an associate professor for some time over there. And then I moved back to the US some years ago, almost 5-6 years ago, first to Alabama, to Troy University, where I was working in an applied behavior analysis program, teaching mostly and some research. And then I joined Southern Illinois 2 years ago. I'm an assistant professor now here. And mostly what I've been doing over the last years has been doing research on mostly two things: aversive control, that's punishment and negative reinforcement, with human and non-human subjects, participants. And most recently, choice. I've been working on self-control and impulsive behavior, same with humans and non-human animals. Most of what I'm interested in right now is related to that. So actually, I'm trying to do research on procrastination, which is, under our approach, is a matter of impulsive choice. Teaching methods, I spent half of my life teaching, so I do research on how to teach better, which is through interteaching. And recently, I've been trying to get into early adversity, this early stress, in a model with rats, and how that affects impulsive choice down the road in adulthood with delay discounting models. So that's me. Thank you.
Sorry, I guess by default, I'm next.
Oh, I didn't realize I was muted. Sorry, I was talking. Yes, if you could go next.
Okay. Thanks. I'm Tim Hackenberg. I'm the senior person on the panel, the old guy. I got all my degrees back in the dark ages. That is before the internet, if you can imagine a time like that. When I talk about my career in behavior analysis, I characterize it as a series of happy accidents. I was an aimless undergraduate in California, grew up in California, and somehow lucked into a involvement with Jane Howard at California State Stanislaus, who was a newly minted Ph.D. from Western Michigan, and she was running a remedial reading program based on direct instruction principles. And that was my introduction to behavior analysis. And I became interested then in more experimental and theoretical branches of behavior analysis. And I ended up going to get my PhD with Phil Heinlein at Temple, and worked exclusively with animals and graduate school, rats and pigeons. But with Phil, I had acquired an appreciation for the generality of behavioral principles across species. So I took a postdoc then at the University of Minnesota with Travis Thompson. And it was just such a wonderful experience. Travis was running an institute at the time, an interdisciplinary institute called the Institute of Disability Studies. And so I did some work with Travis on applied behavioral pharmacology. And I was splitting my time between the state hospital and the operant lab. So it was a bit like Catalina, sounds like, in your experience at Vermont. And it was such a great experience to work in an interdisciplinary institute, to learn how to communicate with people working on similar problems, but from very different perspectives. And I went from there to the University of Florida, and I spent 19 years on the faculty at the University of Florida. And so I worked there on a number of problems, but my students and I focused on cross-species analysis, looking at similarities and differences between humans and other animals and basic behavioral processes, including decision-making paradigms. And then I spent the last 13 years at Reed College, a small little liberal arts college in Portland, Oregon. So I have experience on sort of both ends of the academic continuum, from a very large Research One university where I supervised a dozen or so Ph.D. students, to a very small liberal arts college, all undergraduate, and had a wonderful time there. And I just recently, last year, retired. So hopefully my advice won't be too out of date. But I worked at Reed. We did some token reinforcement work and also some work on social behavior, on cooperation, and social reinforcement. So those are some of the main areas research areas I've been interested in.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you taking the time out of retirement to come and chat with us today.
No problem. I got lots of time.
Sorry, I keep clicking the wrong button on that. All right, so our next question is, what is the experimental analysis of human behavior? I know that maybe everyone thinks that they know what that is and that's why they're here, but I guess from the experts, you that actually study or teach or talk about experimental analysis of behavior, we are interested in hearing from you guys on what your interpretation of that is. So why don't we start with Dr. Hurtado-Parrado this time?
Why you picked me this time? Okay, so well, I will say that this is a experimental analysis of human behavior. The way I see it is a sub area or subspecialty area of behavior analysis, and in particular experimental analysis that studies phenomena in humans, but we're still interested in principles of behavior, which I think is mostly what experimental analysis of behavior does, try to identify principles of behavior or behavior processes, basic research mostly, and but focused on human behavior. But two things that I would like to add to that is just to clarify, I guess, and maybe the discussion will be interesting to hear from the panel and other people, but so I think we assume as experimental behavior analysts that verbal behavior, verbal relations, or verbal functioning is key, is central to understanding human behavior. But we assume that verbal behavior can be understood with the same principles. And of course, that relates to a lot of different areas that I'm not going to try to summarize, but rule-governed behavior, stimulus equivalence, all these areas that are typical for that kind of human functioning. I hope I
Great, thank you.
say something meaningful.
Yes, that was helpful. Thank you. Dr. Hackenberg, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. That's a big question. I like the way that you framed it, Camilo, that this is a subfield of experimental analysis of behavior, which is a branch of, as you know, of behavior analysis that focuses primarily on laboratory work in laboratory settings, where variables can be carefully controlled, behavior can be directly measured, and we sacrifice some what you might call ecological realism for internal validity for identifying and isolating, controlling variables. My bias is toward comparative analysis of behavior. So I see the particular work that I've done in experimental analysis of human behavior has been directed toward trying to understand, as I mentioned earlier, trying to understand similarities and differences with other animals. And so what my students and I have done is try to minimize the procedural differences that separate work with humans from work with other animals. And that's what led into the research we've done on token reinforcement, trying to find some common set of procedures that can apply both to humans and to other animals. We recognize, of course, that there are that humans bring special things to the table. Humans are a distinctive species, like every species. They're unique, but they also have a lot in common with other animals. And so what we've been trying to do is, or I guess the general approach that I take is to understand how humans are different from other animals. We have to first understand what we have in common with other animals. And that sort of identifies where the unique character of human behavior comes in.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Dr. Peters, how do you want to go next?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a whole lot to add to what has already been said. So yes, EAHB, it's scientific activity, and as it's already been mentioned, some field of EAB that deals specifically with human behavior. So it's basically experimental research with humans that employs the conceptual systems of behavior analysis. Yeah, maybe I could add that I think when people talk about EAHB, they often are referring primarily to research that is basic, or that has basic aims or translational research aims. However, I think EAHB can also have applied aims. I think they're within applied behavior analysis. Some research in applied behavior analysis is clearly EAHB as well. And so I think, you can find it anywhere, right? And EAHB research can have, many different aims. Again, it can have applied aims, basic aims, or translational aims. The same study can even have more than one aim. We can't necessarily classify a single research study as basic, applied, or translational. The same study can have both, let's say, applied and translational aims, or translational and basic aims. And yeah, so I think it's a very diverse field, but it is basically the science of behavior analysis as it pertains to human behavior.
Excellent, thank you. Dr. Rey?
I don't know that I have all that much more to add. I think of it as basic and translational research using human participants. And I agree that I teach both EAB and a translational research class in the PhD program at UNMC. And I have to say that that continuum, it's all a continuum where what's basic, what's translational, what's applied, it's not clear cut. So I agree with that. There are going to be some research that's going to seem more applied and then less applied. And yeah, I think I don't have any more to add than that.
Thank you. Well, and I think it's important to remember too that a lot of the applied things that we do, especially those that work in clinics or, schools or other applied settings, a lot of it, or most of it, I should say, is derived from, stuff that has been studied in the laboratory or with human operant or animal research. So I think it's important. And I always try to emphasize to students that they need to have, if not more of a strong foundation in experimental, but just as strong of a foundation experimental as they do in applied to really understand the science of behavior analysis. Thank you. All right, so the next question is, within this subspecialty, what populations do you typically work with? What settings do you typically work in? I know you guys have maybe kind of dabbled a little bit of this already in your previous answers, but anything else that you guys would like to add, we're definitely interested in hearing more that you're willing to share. Let's start with Dr. Pétursdóttir this time.
Yeah, sure. So I work with different populations. I work with both children and adults, and also children of typical developments and children who have autism diagnoses. So I will say I started out my career, and for a long time, my lab did exclusively research with children, and so that was our thing. That was what we were doing. And those were mostly children of typical development, of preschool age or early elementary school age. And the settings we worked in, because we were doing single case design, we didn't think it was feasible to have kids come into the lab repeatedly, every day for 2 months. So we were going out to them. So we were going out to preschools and to after school care centers and running our experiments in those settings. And yeah, then some of the research we did, and that was primarily, I'm not a BCBA, so when I've done research that's been addressing maybe somewhat more applied questions, and where the participants have been kids with language delays who needed language intervention. That's typically research I've done in collaboration with BCBAs, and so those have been done typically at clinics that provide ABA services. In more recent years, my lab has started also doing research with typically developing young adults, and in fact, we've done a little bit with older adults as well. But largely young adults that basically come from our institution's human subjects pool, so they get course credit for participating in our studies. And so right now we're doing a little bit of both, but kind of that shift or that addition of that population came about mostly because, some of our research questions, they just didn't seem to be specific to children at all. We were kind of interested in humans, verbal humans more generally, and studying this population allowed us to conduct larger end studies, which was important because some of our research questions were ones that didn't necessarily lend themselves that well to single subject analysis. So it kind of allowed us to expand the types of questions that we addressed in our research.
Great, thank you. Dr. Rey, would you like to go next?
I work primarily when within the subspecialty with like college students are primary participants. I also do research with children with ASD, even though this whole webinar is supposed to be ABA beyond ASD. That is still put some of the population of our research participants. And more recently, I'm dabbling into conducting research with participants who are remote through MTurk. And so that's like the general population, and being able to work with people who aren't physically there. Yeah, so it's a typically developing just adults, I guess, is what you can say. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Dr. Hackenberg?
Yeah, so I've worked primarily with pigeons and with rats, and with humans. When I was at the University of Florida, the work that we did with humans was mainly adult humans, college students. We would pay them to come back for many sessions, but we also did some work, as Anna has mentioned, with the human subjects pool, doing kind of 1 hour, 2 hour studies, things like that. Yeah, that's basically it.
Great, thank you. Dr. Hurtado-Parrado?
Okay, thanks. Yes, because I do research with human and non-human animals. So with animals, yes, rats, same thing. fish. I worked with fish for some time, still do it once in a while. Recently with dogs and their owners, and that has been very interesting. So, and with humans, it has been opportunistic. So most of the time, college students, a very specific population. We have tried, sometimes depending on what's needed and possibilities to go beyond colleges. So we have tried to reach parents outside but mostly college students. And I think that's part of I don't know if that could be a population. In terms of settings, because of that research that I've conducted, mostly in collaboration, but with dogs and owners of dogs, training dog owners, that has expanded into I don't know how to call that setting, but it's a setting of people in their own homes, working with their dogs or living with their dogs. But in terms of setting, typically laboratory research, here in the basement, or sometimes going to schools to collect data. That has happened as well. Yep. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. The next question. So what training or preparation is needed for this subspecialty? So for those in the audience who are interested in potentially going into this line, I think it'd be helpful just to speak to your experiences a little bit about how you got to this point, what was required, and et cetera. All right, so how about this time, let's start with Dr. Rey.
It's a little bit difficult for me to answer this question because this subspecialty is really so broad and can cover so many different research topics. Almost anything can be addressed via, experimental analysis of human behavior. But I guess I have two answers to this question. One would be find out what your interests are. Specifically, like the topics that you're interested in studying more about, such as maybe perhaps verbal behavior or relapse or token economies, that kind of thing. And that would be the kind of training that you would want to go into and learn more about. But not all of this type of research is conducted with in a human operant with like a computer lab, but a lot of it is. It doesn't have to be. There are other means of conducting this research, but a lot of it is. And I guess my recommendation would be to get some experience with coding, computer programming. That could be helpful to be able to manipulate your own operandums and programs that you're using for your research. That's something that you wouldn't necessarily get through grad school or formal training.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Dr. Hurtado-Parrado, you want to go next?
Yeah, I agree with that last part. I mean, overall with the whole answer, but yes, I think as any researcher right now, because at the end of the day, it's a research focus area. So research tools include, and they're mostly right now based on coding. I agree with that. And that entails, of course, online research and surveys and, learning about Qualtrics and all these things. So for sure, all that. I think, I don't know the experience of the other members of the panels, like I was trained in single case research methods, and I am as a behavior analyst, I'm a strong advocate of them. But with human research, especially if you want to communicate with other experts that are working on human behavior, but they are from another tradition, they usually use inferential statistics methods. And I feel that we behavior analysts, typically, we don't get that training. So it has been very useful to I guess because I had a background in psychology, I had a strong training, not as strong, but I had a training on inferential statistics based methods, hypothesis testing and all that. So I think that's something that, at least for communication, and so publication often it requires that, especially with large groups and all that analysis. So that's something else that I think I don't think is common for most of behavior analysts. working in other fields, but I think it becomes very important for us. Some math is related to that, and especially for people who are getting into the delay discounting and modeling of behavior, some math, but I don't think it's very advanced. It's just very basic algebra and things like that, which I am still trying to learn. So I think I only learned algebra in high school, and then I forgot about it. And then as I went back to all these things, I've been trying to learn many of these things again. So please don't feel discouraged on that. But I think it's something that happens especially with choice research and all that. And I think overall is research experience, which I think is the preparation. And I think that's common for most behavior analysts. So I think that's unique to us. Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you. Dr. Hackenberg?
Yeah, sure. I totally agree with what's been said about getting some experience, some hands-on experience with programming and with quantitative methods. And just more generally, to learn about things outside of behavior analysis. In my experience, the track to a faculty position and to research in experimental analysis behavior was pretty much necessary to do a postdoc, at least in my area of the field. And a postdoc is a great opportunity to learn, to pick up new skills, to learn how to communicate with people outside of the field. So to find out, about behavioral neuroscience, behavioral pharmacology, behavioral ecology, behavioral economics, computational modeling, these fields that are adjacent to behavior analysis. And you might be surprised to learn that the skills that you develop as a behavior analyst are really attractive to people outside the field. For example, in behavioral neuroscience, it used to be the case that behavioral neuroscientists would have these really elegant, sophisticated neurobiological preparations, and then they would have the crudest measures of behavior, but that is changing, and the best behavioral neuroscience these days is really taking behavior seriously. And so if you come in with a behavioral background and training in experimental analysis, you can make yourself useful. You can pick up skills in behavioral pharmacology and behavioral neuroscience. Those are easy. The hard skills are learning how to do research with, behavioral research with in our tradition. So I would just echo what's been said about picking up these other skills and just making yourself useful. That's primarily directed toward the graduate students. For the undergraduates out there, I would say just get involved in research as early as possible. Even if it's not something that you're especially interested in, just get as much research experience as you can as an undergraduate to learn what you're interested in, what you're not interested in. And when it comes to applying to graduate programs, your research background is going to be one of the most important criteria. So I would just encourage students just to get involved in research as early as possible and do as much as you can.
Great advice, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next question. If anyone in the audience has specific questions that they'd like to ask during this question, if you guys want to either submit it to the chat, or there's a Q&A function. That way, once this question is done, I can open it up. And then if there's no question, we'll just continue with the questions that we already had planned. But feel free, if you do have questions, to go ahead and start putting them in the chat. All right, so the next question is, are there any prominent special interest groups or professional organizations or any other just networking type activities that you guys are aware of that for students or anyone that wants to get more involved with other professionals We know that our field is small, so just places that people can go either physically or online or wherever, that they can start getting involved with similar like-minded people who share their interests. So I'm gonna actually let Dr. Hackenberg go first, because I think I've been putting him last unintentionally for several questions. So go ahead and go first if you'd like.
Oh, I don't really have much to say about this. I mean, the obvious one is EAHB SIG. That's the Experimental Analysis of Human Behavior Special Interest Group, which is part of ABAI. And they have a EHB SIG has a newsletter, a journal, and a special programming track, I believe, at the ABAI conference. So that's the place I would check out first.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Dr. Pétursdóttir, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I don't have much to say about this either, other than the EAHB SIG. I think that's a place to go if you're specifically looking to meet other researchers working with human participants. I personally am a member of the Verbal Behavior SIG, and that also gives me a chance to network with people who are doing research specifically in my area of interest. Of course, that SIG also includes, practitioners and others with general interest in verbal behavior.
Great, thank you. And I'm part of the VB SIG too, so I will advocate for that. Dr. Rey, would you like to go ahead?
I don't have much to add either. I would say, yeah, the EAHB SIG is kind of what my go-to resource. Yeah, and they have a behavior bulletin, and they have a lot of resources there.
Thank you. Dr. Hurtado-Parrado.
Yeah, I will add the SQUAB, the Society for the Quantitative Analysis of Behavior. Yeah, historically, they have been focused, I think they have been doing what Dr. Hackenberg mentioned, like this kind of comparative approach. That was a great way to put it, by the way. So of course, there's a lot of animal, non-human research, but there's also a lot of human research, experimental. And I think that they have nice tutorials and things on their website, and they have their separate meeting at the beginning of ABAI every year. So I would suggest that one, the Society for Quantitative Analysis of Behavior.
Lesley, you do have one question in the chat.
Hold on, I don't see, thank you, Dr. Hurtado-Parrado. I don't see the question. Oh, I do see it now, just kidding. Okay, all right, so we do have a question from the audience. It says, please share if there are any areas of research that are high in demand. Ooh, that's a good one. All right, let's see. I'm going to say, let's start with, I forget who I started with last time. Let's start with Dr. Pétursdóttir.
Hey, I don't know if I know the answer to this question, because maybe it depends on what is meant by demand. Whose demand? The demand of the community of behavior analysis, or is it demand by those who fund behavioral research? That's tends to be a very important type of demand to respond to if you want to have access to funding to do your work. But I'm actually I need a little bit more time to think about that one, so I'm just going to turn that over to others while I think about it, at least.
Oops, sorry, my mute button wasn't working there for a second. Thank you. Dr. Rey, would you like to go next?
Yeah, can you repeat the question?
Sure. It is, please share if there are any areas of research that are high in demand.
Yeah, I don't know exactly the answer. I think that there are, the demand, there's a lot of research that is going on in different areas with human subjects that is experimental in nature. I'm trying, it's like, I'm just so focused on my area of research that, there's a lot of research demand and with human subjects and basic and translational, definitely with different types of relapse. I think that's pretty popular right now and coming out a lot. I don't know. I think honestly, the research interest of the panelists here is a good example of different areas of research in demand, definitely delayed discounting as well. And it sounds like maybe we have other panelists that have something more to say. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Anna, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Just because I didn't answer the question, but yeah, some of the things that I just thought of in terms of, what funders have been calling for is, obviously for a long time, there's, funders have been interested in neuroscience and brain behavior relations. So, I think there would be demand for research that makes that link with behavior analysis. And another one I can think of is, learning and artificial intelligence. How can research on the way humans learn contribute to AI development and things like that. So those are kind of some of the funding priorities I kind of remember encountering recently.
Thank you. Did any of our other panelists have an answer that they wanted to share related to areas of research that are in high demand?
I would just say, just to pick up on Anna's point about funding priorities, I think we, as a field, we haven't always been very good at communicating the importance of our work to a broader non-behavioral audience. And what funding agencies really force you to do is to frame your questions in a way that are that's meaningful to a non-behavioral audience. And this requires learning about things outside of behavior analysis. I'm going to get on my soapbox again and talk about the importance of learning, the subject matter outside behavior analysis, learning how to communicate with other professionals in the field. And I remember as a postdoc, I think I heard Joe Brady, one of the great figures in our field. If you've not heard the name Joe Brady, write it down and look it up after. Joe Brady was a master at communicating the importance of behavioral work to a broad audience. And he had this saying, if the man wants a blue suit, turn on the blue light. And it was a way of conveying this idea that we need to be able to communicate our ideas effectively to a non-specialist audience. And if you're going to pursue work in this field, you're going to need to find resources for your research. Research costs money, and you need to learn how to get funding, either from federal agencies, from your more local agencies, whatever. You need to be able to communicate effectively. And I think that it's not to so much to change what you're interested in to chase the money, but to figure out how to make a compelling case for funding the work that you're passionate about.
Great, thank you. Good points. Did anyone else have anything to add?
Yeah, I will just like to add something Totally agree with everything that was said. What really liked about that question was the word demand. So exactly, demand depends who's offering what. So for experimental analysis of behavior in general and human behavior, so we do basic research, and typically we need funding for that. And so the funding usually comes from, you know, a university or agencies. So the good thing about human behavior is that, I mean, any need to change human behavior can be translated into an experiment for us. The challenge, as Dr. Hackenberg mentioned, was trying to make that phenomena, make those phenomena or those processes relevant in a way that can be attractive to people outside of our field, that they understand and all that. So I think that the two areas that were mentioned, one is delay discounting, yeah, for sure, but delay discounting not per se is mostly about addictions, for example. So I still see a lot of funding there for addiction related work, and we have a long tradition of trying to understand addictions from a behavior analytic tradition, but then changing that, how to change impulsive choice and all those things. I think that's something that is always, and that relates to relapse, as it was mentioned. And then on the other hand, it is most of the funding right now requires one way or the other. If it is basic, requires a relationship with neuroscience. So whether we like it or not, we need to get there, as Dr. Hackenberg said, and we need to connect with that language of those funding agencies that understand brain as the main focus. So yeah, so that's what I wanted to add. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, and I think that touches on what Dr. Pétursdóttir said earlier about, you know, there can still be applied, you know, objectives and whatnot. And I think addiction's a good example of that, and relapse and all those things that are kind of hot topics in this area right now. I went ahead and put up the post test. So if you guys completed the pre-test at the beginning of the panel, please scan in and complete the post test or click on the link in the chat. We have just a few more minutes. Time always goes by very quickly, it seems. So I will pose one more question. I don't see another question in the chat yet. So I will go ahead and do one more, and then at the very end, I will wrap up. Sorry, I just had to go back to where we were. All right. So this might be a big question, but that's okay. I think it's a good one. So where do you see or hope to see the experimental analysis of human behavior focusing on? And in the interest of time, maybe we can just do like a 30 to 45 second answer, and that way everyone can have a chance, and then we can wrap up. So I'm not sure who went first last time, but how about Dr. I see Dr. Rey shaking her head no. So Dr. Hackenberg.
Oh, wow. This is such a big question. There's so many really exciting, vibrant areas of EAB currently. Again, not to beat a dead horse, but really breaking down the relatively artificial boundaries between behavior analysis and other traditions that are studying human behavior from a functional perspective. So, in an area that I know something about is behavioral economics, which is, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the really great work in behavioral economics came out of behavior analysis labs, but the behavioral economics that that many people are most familiar with comes from a different tradition. So trying to sort of integrate and try to get beyond some of these barriers, and I think is something that we ought to be doing.
Great, thank you. Since we only have a couple minutes, I'll let whoever would like to speak next. Not everyone has to go since we only have a couple minutes. Dr. Pétursdóttir, Dr. Hurtado-Parrado, did you guys have anything you wanted to add?
I can go.
Sure.
So very quickly, so I will focus on what I hope, not what I think is going to happen, mostly what I hope. One of the areas that I hope will grow bigger is rule governed behavior. I feel frustrated to see that such an important area for human experimental analysis, and I still don't see much of experimental work on it. There's a lot of conceptual, and for some reason, sometime in the 90s, most of the experimental really focused on the lab work kind of slowed down, or so that's one of the areas that I hope that grows more.
Well, yeah, definitely an important area. Not much, in general, not a lot of research on it, which is kind of surprising. Any other thoughts from the panelists before we start wrapping up?
I think I'd like to see, my answer to that last question. So I would like to see behavior analysis just come back more into the mainstream of behavioral research, and thinking of my own area, just research on language and cognition. Behavior analysis certainly isn't in the mainstream there. I would love to see it come back, come into the mainstream, I should say, not that it was really ever there. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah. If I have anything else to add, because I didn't really get to answer the training question, I just wanted to agree with those who talked about the importance of learning to communicate to those who are outside of your field. I think learning to do EHB requires doing EHB, so that's the most important thing. Just get a lot of experience doing that research. That's how you learn to do it. But you also have to learn how other people study your research topic, how your research topic is studied outside of behavior analysis, because that's going to be important when it comes to communicating outside of your immediate community, when it comes to obtaining funding and things like that.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry if we skipped you on that one. Apologies on that. Anything else from Dr. Rey before we wrap up? I did add a resource page here for some of the references and things that were mentioned and provided by the panelists. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt or cut you off if you were going to say anything, Dr. Rey. No, okay.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I think that, one thing that I'm hearing a theme is that, like expanding beyond just like the little niche of behavior analysis, and kind of echoing the thought that in order to do that, you just need to expand your research repertoire. The research methods that you're taught in a typical behavior analytic graduate program isn't going to be sufficient. You really do need to expand, and that would be some additional training that is important, and especially to communicate with the scientific community in general, outside of specifically our behavior analytic journals.
Yes, that's always a very important point for sure. Okay, well, thank you. Just a couple last things to wrap up. As you can see on the slide here on the slide, we have 3 more webinars over the next few months with these specific topics. So if you are interested in learning more about any of these topics, please join us on those days. We'll have a registration place for you guys to sign up, just like you did for this one. You can also follow us on social media, any of these sites. Thank you again to our panelists for your time and willingness to come speak with us today. We have your emails posted here. Hopefully that's okay that we shared those, so that way if anyone has any further questions or is interested in any research, they can contact you all just with questions or whatnot. If you guys could just stay, the panelists, if you guys could stay on just for a minute, I would appreciate, just so we can kind of wrap up. And if you guys have any further questions in general, please feel free to reach out. Thank you guys so much for your time, and thank you everyone for coming. We hope to see you again at future panels, and have a great rest of your day and good weekend.